Hello, everybody, and welcome to the UFC 241 dissection. On this episode, usually I go through the news and some matchups and stuff. I haven't done one of these in a while, so some of the matchups I talk about, it's going to be like old news. I know you've already heard it, like Chris Weidman, Dominic Reyes. That's a great fight. Another one that I want to talk about is Johnny Walker versus Corey Anderson. I know that was announced a little bit ago, but that's a great fight. But let's get into some breaking news before we actually get into the podcast. Kat Zingano was released from the UFC today. I don't think it's been officially announced by the UFC. I saw it on MMA Junkie. But if it's true, and it sounds like it's true, like it sounds like they've got credible sources or they wouldn't have reported something like that, man, it's kind of shocking. She's someone who, I mean, I know she's had a lot of problems outside of the octagon and she's faced some injuries and stuff, but I didn't think that she was somebody who was on the verge of getting cut. I mean, I can't think off the top. I know that she lost that most recent fight against Megan Anderson, right? Like, she got hit in the head, kind of. Didn't she get, kicked in the eye? I think she got fucking, kicked in the eyeball. And the toenail scraped her eyeball or some shit and it cut her. It was like an anomaly, but hold on. I'll look up who her losses were, too, before that, because she wasn't very active for a while. But she's got a win over Amanda Nunes. Beat her via ground and pound. Won her last matchup before Megan Anderson, which, like I said, is kind of her loss to Megan Anderson was such an anomaly. That doesn't happen very often. It was a strange way to lose a fight, but I mean, what can you do? There was a lot of debate about whether the rules needed to be changed after that fight, but I didn't think so. I think it was just kind of shit, poor luck. It just kind of happens. But I guess she did drop 3 in a row before her win over Marion Renault. Ronda Rousey, she lost to Juliana Pena and Ketlin Vieira. So I don't know if she was injured again and there was just a problem with getting her to accept fights because she was always hurt or what was going on. I don't know all the details behind it, but she's been in the UFC for 7 years, and notable wins include Amanda Nunes, Misha Tate, Raquel Pennington. She's got some big names on her resume, and she's very legit. She's a good wrestler. Just didn't work out, I guess. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where she ends up. And, when they release people like this, it adds to the pool of talent that other organizations can suck up. Someone's going to want Kat Zingano. Kat Zingano's going to have no problem fighting for a place like Bellator or One Championship or PFL, especially with that $1 million prize that PFL has. I mean, go over there. You might have and what do you fight at? 130 for who's? What weight class is Harrison over there? I think 145. I mean, Cyborg's a free agent. That's another big one. Cyborg getting cut. I mean, we're getting off topic now, but I do want to discuss Cyborg as well. But with the Cyborg thing, man, it just seemed like it never felt to me like Cyborg was a part of the UFC. You know what I mean? They never promoted her accordingly, and there were never any real legitimate matchups that made you jump out of your seat until Amanda Nunes, and felt like Amanda Nunes was still the ace out of that matchup. I mean, she was the underdog going into it, but man, I don't know. It never felt like she got her fair shake at things in the UFC. And I mean, her performance over that Felicia Spencer girl. I mean, I know that Rogan and Alec took a bunch of shit, which made no sense to me, but took a bunch of shit about how they called that fight. And Cyborg is one of the, most dominant females of all time. She's incredible. The way that it's not just how she wins, it's how she beats girls. She beats the fuck out of them. So to me, it made sense that Rogan and Anik took that narrative, because that is what you had to take away from the fight. It's not normal to watch a girl still come forward at Cyborg after Cyborg's thrown all that at her. Whether she was dominating the fight or not, it was just something that you don't see very often. Usually girls succumb to the pressure that Cyborg was putting on them, and that wasn't the case. So I didn't think that there was bias against her in that regard, but I definitely think that Dana White and her have had, like I said, I don't know all the details. I have no insider scoops on any of this bullshit. I'm just talking from a fan's perspective. But it just never felt like Dana was really into the idea of her being there in the first place, He wanted her in, he wanted her out as soon as she got in, and there was all this fight about creating the weight class for her, and fuck, I don't know. I think she'll be better off elsewhere. I really do. I think that she'll be able to perform better just because she won't have to focus on all the drama that's associated with being part of the UFC. I mean, her road to the UFC has been ridiculously. She's a big girl. I mean, I don't know how many organizations have 155-pound weight classes for women. You know, they're not that popular if they do. And it's just hard to find. I think it's kind of hard to find competition at that weight class right now. Like the weight classes that are hot for females are like 125, 115, 135, you know? Like when you get into 145 and 155, there doesn't seem to be that much of it. And maybe it's just undiscovered yet. Maybe there's not enough of a, you know, maybe it's not getting the exposure that it needs, but you just don't hear a lot about it, man. So that weight class was basically designed for her. And when Amanda knocked her out, I just think like they had no more reason to have her there. You know what I mean? Like they kind of proved, okay, like we've got this girl who's going to crush everybody that she fights at 145 pounds except for Amanda Nunes. And Amanda Nunes just delegitimized her 145-pound title, and it probably makes sense for Amanda to defend more at 135 because there's just more competition there. You know what I mean? So I just don't think from a business perspective it did make sense to deal with like to keep Cyborg, and I don't think they were getting along. So I get both sides of it. You know what I mean? Anyway, some other big news that I wanted to talk about was Frankie Edgar finally deciding to drop down to bantamweight. And man, this is a move that honestly should have came probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, he was small for 155 pounds, but he won the title there, right? So I think that when he thought like he dropped to 145, it just didn't seem necessary. He had already won a title with the weight class above that. It didn't seem necessary for him to cut an additional 10 pounds to get down to 135 when he was already competing and beating a lot of people at 145 pounds. I mean, you got to think about the names that Frankie Edgar's racked up at 145 pounds. And his kryptonite really has been against guys that are bigger than him. Like, I think Aldo's bigger than him, right? Ortega's bigger than him. Holloway's bigger than him. And it's also, the sport has advanced so far that, like, every little edge that you can get is so fucking important. And I think that if he had been fighting at 135, he might have been a world champion. I'm not saying that he can't do it now, but it's definitely a little bit of a tougher road now that he's older, right? Like, it's definitely going to be... It's going to be a different avenue to the title. It's going to have to happen fast. Like, he's going to have to win some fights quickly against some tough competition. So, fuck, I mean, he's competitive. My friend and I were talking. We think that, like, Cody Garbrandt versus Frankie would be a good matchup, you know. But Cody's got legitimate knockout power, and Frankie's got great wrestling. And Cody comes from that alpha male background where they emphasize a lot of wrestling, so you know he can wrestle. He doesn't really utilize it a lot because his hands are so good, but that would be a good fight. Frankie can box. I'd have a lot of interest in watching a matchup like that at 135 pounds, and it would kind of let you know where Frankie stood. Because you got to remember, too, though, that, like, Frankie's the guy who ran through Yair Rodriguez, you know? When everybody thought that Yair was going to be this new up-and-coming guy that was just going to, like, maybe kind of, you know, new wave, like, coming through and kind of going to wash over Frankie and drift out to sea. But he just fucking smashed Yair. Just smashed him. And, I mean, he didn't look bad against Holloway. Holloway was just better, and Holloway was just bigger. His striking was more effective. Like, his punches hurt more when they would land. He's just... Fuck, man. I mean, like I said, I would have liked to see the move sooner, but I'm rooting for him. Like, I love Frankie Edgar. I went to the same university as he did, Clarion, so I have a little bit of a bias towards him. But he's the man. I mean, he'll fight. He fights all the... Like that fight with Ortega, he didn't have to take that fight. But he did, and he lost, and he still got to he still got to fight for the title again, but... I think he's a UFC Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. So it's going to be interesting to see how he performs. He's got to be 38, 39. He's got to be up there, close to 40, right? I don't know how old Frankie Edgar is. I guess I have a fucking computer right here. I can look it up. 37. So, yeah, man. I mean, if he's gonna make a run, it's got to be now. You know, he's already getting old, fighting old, right? Like, that's an old age for to be a professional athlete. It's kind of an anomaly at those lighter weight classes too. Like, it's not so weird to see guys like that who are that old at heavyweight. Like, how old is DC? Like 38? God damn, he might even be 40 something. 40. Yeah, he's 40. And he's the heavyweight champion of the world, you know. So as you go up in weight class, you tend to see people, for whatever reason, I think they're just more, I don't know if they're more durable or if, like, I kind of think what it is the fact that, like, the technique and the speed at 135 pounds and, like, 125 pounds and all those lighter weight classes, like, it's just so hard to, like, if you lose a little bit of a step, it's exposed because those guys are so fast and technique is everything at those levels. So if you lose even a step, you're way behind them. But when you're bigger, you still have the ability to knock guys out. You still have the ability to kind of bully them around a little bit, you know? But it's not really the case when you're small. So I think your game, the holes in your game just start to show a little bit more as you start getting older. Whereas it's not as, the movements aren't as quick, like there's like a point of diminishing returns, right? And when you start getting up into heavier weight classes, it's just not as big a fucking deal to get older, it seems like. All right, what else do we got on here that I want to talk about? Chris Weidman versus Dominic Reyes. So recently we saw Luke Rockhold try to move up from 185 to 205 against Jan Blachowicz, right? And it went terribly. He got knocked the fuck out. He looked lethargic. He looked like his leg kicks looked strong and stuff. He looked good early on, but you could tell that when he was engaging in like the clinch battles and stuff, it was just wearing on him more than he expected it to. Like it was draining him of all of his energy. He's also a guy, man, he's been like plagued by injuries. He had that staph infection. He's got a modeling career outside of this. Like Luke Rockhold is a guy who I feel like his attention was in a whole bunch of different places at once. And he fought a guy who was way bigger than him and very experienced. And if you like, Rockhold is great on the feet, don't get me wrong, but he's really good on top. Like when he gets on top of you, he's suffocating. His jiu-jitsu is really good. And Jan Blachowicz, his specialty is grappling, and he's bigger. He's also like, you got to realize that you have to adjust to that weight class. Like, a lot of people made this big deal about Max going up to 155 and not looking good, but like, or not that he didn't look good. Poirier, like they both look good, but Poirier just looked fantastic. But it's like, and they were talking about how like Poirier had more pop on his punches. Now his strikes seem to be more significant. And it's like, well, no shit. Poirier was fighting at that weight class for, I don't know how many fights he had there before Max moved up. That was Max's first fight at 155 pounds. Like his body's not accustomed to that. Like if he was going to fight at 155, he would probably add additional muscle and he would have more, like he would be more powerful. He would be bigger. But like when you're moving from 145 and your first fight is at 155, fuck, man. I mean, it's a tough go. You're fighting a guy who's adjusted to that weight class already. Like he's got a ton of experience in it. He's accustomed, like I said, he's well adjusted. And I thought Max looked good. I just thought people were right. Like Poirier definitely was landing like the more significant strikes, but Poirier just looked fantastic in that fight. His footwork and his boxing and everything looked super fucking crisp. I got way off track. Anyway, I know where I was going with that. But my point is with this matchup, right? You got Chris Weidman going up to fight Dominic Reyes, and Dominic Reyes is still relatively new to the game. Jan Blachowicz had so many, like, he's such a veteran of the sport, and he's big, like, whereas, like, if you're going to move up, this is a perfect fight for Weidman because Dominic Reyes is also, like, a rising contender. He just had that, I thought it was questionable, win over Volkan Ozdemir. You know, he's got some knockouts on his highlight reel, but Weidman he's held the middleweight championship before. He's consistently, like, a top 5 talent for the UFC. And you got to wonder what he looks like when he's not diminishing himself. And he's not accustomed to that weight class yet, but he's fighting a guy who doesn't quite have the experience that Blachowicz had. That's why I like this matchup so much. I think it's more fair in that regard. Like, it just makes more sense. Like, could you imagine Weidman's, like, intro fight being to 205 being, like, Alexander Gustafsson? I would hate it. I would hate that fight, but I love it if Weidman has 2 or 3 fights under his belt at 205 and looks good. You know? I mean, you're talking about a 20-pound difference that you're carrying on the day of the fight. That's fucking crazy. That's a lot of weight. Imagine carrying around like 2 extra bowling balls on you. You know what I mean? It's going to drain the energy. And you can't account all the things that you do in camp. You can't account for the adrenaline that comes with fight night. You know? So you got to get adjusted to fighting in that weight class, man, I think. And this is just a much better fight. I like the matchup a lot more. Lando Venata got announced against Mark Diakeshvili. That's going to be a great fight. This was pretty recent, a fun fight. I know I'm all over the place, guys. I'm just bullshitting my way through this. But that's a really good fight. That'll probably stay on the feet a lot. You'll see a lot of flashy striking. Both guys are very dynamic, very varied in the striking. They set things up well. That's a great matchup. And Johnny Walker versus Corey Anderson is another big one that I wanted to talk about because Corey Anderson is such a strong wrestler and he puts that pressure on you and he comes forward with the boxing, but Johnny Walker is a knockout artist. I mean, that flying knee that he landed on Misha Serkinov, incredible. The timing on it and just like the placement of it was, whoo. And those elbows that he knocked Khalil Roundtree out with in the clinch, he's just dangerous, man. And he looks better and better every time he fights. He's, I mean, a genetic freak. He's athletically, like, I mean, both of these guys are two of the rising contenders at 205 pounds. And I think Corey Anderson has got, his feet are a little more wet. And it's going to be interesting to see how Johnny Walker deals with somebody who does have a strong wrestling style and who does pressure you constantly. You know, is he going to be able to take out a guy like Anderson? I'll tell you what, man, if he goes in there and he knocks out Corey Anderson, you've got to start thinking about matching him up with some of the top guys in that division. And then you can start talking about him potentially being a threat to John Jones. Like, if he knocks Corey Anderson out in spectacular fashion, it's not an easy feat to accomplish. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, the things that Johnny Walker have done so far are impressive, and they're definitely legitimate. He's very dangerous. He's athletic, but he's got to do it over somebody like Corey, and this is I'm looking forward to this fight a lot. All right, sorry I had to pause there for a second to check my work email. But anyway, I think that's all I wanted to get through that I wanted to talk about so far. I probably missed some stuff. If you guys think of anything else that you want me to discuss or whatever, just leave it in the comments, and I'll be sure to get to it. But let's move on to the main card of UFC 241 coming up this weekend in Anaheim, and it's a stacked fucking card. First fight is going to be a middleweight bout between Derek Brunson and Ian Heinisch. Ian Heinisch is a guy who actually trains right up the road from me. I live in Colorado, near Denver, and he trains out of Factory X Muay Thai. Really Colorado state champion wrestler. I think he got into some trouble with the law, got arrested, that turned his life around. I don't know the whole story behind it, but he's looked impressive so far. So he kind of broke onto the scene when he got a win over Justin Sumter in the Dana White Contender Series. Got a first round knockout, ground and pound knockout. Looked really good. His wrestling was sharp, his boxing sharp. And then he goes into he makes his UFC debut against Cesar Ferreira, wins a unanimous decision. Looked good in that fight. You know, Ferreira is a guy who has good jiu-jitsu. You know, he's good at everything. He's a veteran. And got a dominant victory there. And then he goes and he fights Antonio Carlos Jr. Now, this was a close fight. There were, I could see how you could score it for either guy, but regardless, Antonio Carlos Jr. is no fucking joke. His ground game is very good. And Heinisch was able to pick up a win, man. I thought it was questionable, like I said. I don't know who I would have gave it to if I scored it, but fuck, man. Heinisch, he's good. And he can wrestle. But he's going to be fighting Derek Brunson. And Derek Brunson is a guy who has a lot of experience over some top-level guys like Robert Whittaker, Jacare Souza, Lyoto Machida. Granted, I mean, he's lost to a lot of top guys at 185 as well, but he's very wild with the strikes sometimes, man. He overextends on stuff, and that makes me nervous against a wrestler like Heinisch. I also think that Derek Brunson is a guy that you could categorize as an emotional fighter. Like, if you look on his face, you can kind of tell the mood that he's in during a fight. It's not just like the straight game face. Like, you can read emotions on his face during the fight, and I think it impacts how he reacts to things. I'd like to see him get a little more like precise, a little more calculated, and not reach for things so often. He also has he'll go head hunting, man. And when you're facing a wrestler, if you overextend on stuff, that opens up opportunities for them to shoot on you. So this is a tough fucking fight. This is a tough fight to pick because, like, what I've seen from Heinisch on the feet, he's good, but if him and Derek Brunson get into a striking match, I think Brunson has a chance to knock him the fuck out. And Brunson has he's got a wrestling background. Like, he should be able to stuff some of the takedowns, you know? It's not like he doesn't know how to grapple. So, man, I've been going back and forth on this fight. I think this is one of the harder fights to pick on the card just because Brunson does have so much experience against high-level competition. And if he can go in there against a guy who's an up-and-comer and maybe approach it with a different attitude, you might see a more full and a more complete Derek Brunson. But I don't know, man. If he gets wild, he might get taken down. I think I'm going to go with Brunson. I think Brunson's going to be able to catch him and knock him out at some point. I really do. I think that the striking will play into his hands at some point in the fight. But he's got to be careful not to overextend. He has to stay precise. Like, he has to stay calculated. He has to stay. He can't be just winging punches at this guy and getting taken down and trapped on the ground and not being able to get back to his feet and wasting time. It's only a 3-round fight, you know? That being said, like, you got to be careful whenever you try to change your game plan like that, because you don't want to take away the things that he's good at. Like, he obviously has power. He has the ability to knock you out. So, like I said, just dial it back a little bit. Dial back the crazy. Dial back the emotion a little bit. Just draw it in. I think he'll have a good fight this fight, though. I think this is a great fight for him. He's coming off a win over Elias Theodorou, who has an awkward style and not an easy win to pick up. So I think he'll be riding some confidence, and I think he's going to look good. But if he does get emotional and he does start overextending on things, look for the takedown and look for Ian Heinisch to have a good night. I wouldn't want to bet on this fight, but sorry, I just got this mic, so I'm keep adjusting it and shit and trying to figure out where I want it. But yeah, I wouldn't bet on this fight, but if I was gonna place money, I'd probably put it on Brunson. All right, next we move on to the featherweight division, where Gabriel Benitez is gonna fight Sadiq Youssef. And Youssef is a guy who comes on and has that war against Mike Davis on Dana White Contender Series. Looked good, mixing in the leg kicks. That was really, I think, the big difference maker in that fight. Is like Mike Davis, he had really good boxing, really good footwork, really good head movement, but Sadiq was able to land leg kicks and kicks to the body and just mix it up a little bit better. And he counters, and when he sits down on his punches, he has some fucking power behind it. So he picks up that win, gets himself a contract, then comes in, gets a first-round questionable knockout over Suman Mokhtarian. If I was the ref, I personally wouldn't have stopped it there, but there was no denying that Mokhtarian was in trouble, right? I think you could have let it go for a little bit longer. Like, nobody wants to watch a guy get the fuck beat out of him. But he was covering up. He wasn't defending himself, and I think Sadiq had him hurt. So, you know, take that fight and do what you want with it. I think it was a legit knockout. I think that it was inevitable, but you just got to let it go a little longer to make sure, because I've definitely seen guys come back and recover from worse. But then his most recent fight was against Shaman Moraes, where he picked up a unanimous decision, and he was just able to land the cleaner shots, and he stayed pretty defensive, and Moraes just had a hard time figuring him out, man. Sadiq's a tough motherfucker to kind of get a read on. He's good at countering. He sits back. He picks his shots. Then he explodes out of nowhere sometimes, though. So he's a hard style to deal with. But he's going to be fighting Gabriel Benitez, and Benitez is coming off of what's his name? He just fought. There it is. Humberto Bandone. I can never pronounce. I always forget it. But he got caught in a deep armbar early in the first round. And then he picked Humberto up, slammed him, and knocked him the fuck out. Hit him with a couple shots for good measure, and the fight was over. Before that, he picked up a unanimous decision win over Jason Knight, Jason Knight is really well-rounded, fights over in bare knuckle now, but he was someone who was riding a fucking hot streak. Like, how many fights did he win in a row? I don't even know how many. And then he dropped like 4 in a row. And I don't know. I think I think when he went into that fight with Benitez, he kind of they made a good point about this. I remember them saying this when they were commentating the fight, that he thought he went into it thinking that his jiu-jitsu was going to be better than it was, that it was going to be dominant over Benitez, and Benitez was able to just, get on top and stay on top, and sometimes that's all. And on the feet, he was beating Jason Knight up. His striking was very crisp. Gabriel Benitez is dangerous. He lost a unanimous decision to Enrique Barzola, but that's not. It was a good fight, but that's like a blemish on your record if you look at how Barzola's done lately, and especially how he did this past weekend against Bobby Moffett. Barzola is legit. He's a very good wrestler. He's got strong grappling. He's got great striking. He mixes his kicks in well. He changes levels. Barzola is really fucking good. And I don't think a loss over him 2 years ago is like detrimental to his career. Gabriel Benitez he's 21-6, but don't let those 6 losses fool you. He can throw his hands around. I'm taking Sadiq in this fight. I think that Sadiq is going to counter, and there's going to be a big power difference. Sadiq's going to have a lot of power. I think that the way that Benitez wins this fight is constantly keeping stuff in Sadiq's face. You got to keep the jab in his face. You got to just keep him guessing. You got to keep him, because if you get predictable on things and he starts timing the counters on your way in and stuff, you're going to have a hard time. He's a guy who you got to you got to draw things out of him. You got to draw reactions out of him and then capitalize. You got to counter the counter fighter, right? You got to draw the reactions out of him and then go in and counter yourself. So this is going to be an interesting matchup. This is a hard fight to pick too, but I think Sadiq will just stay very defensive a lot of the time, and he's not going to give Benitez a ton of openings. I think that'll be your main problem that you see for Benitez is he'll be looking for stuff and he'll be wanting to throw stuff, but it won't be there. It'll make it, and the power of Sadiq, I think, will make Benitez just a little bit hesitant, and that'll let Sadiq capitalize. This fight could end in a knockout. If they get into a war, who knows who's going to knock who out? But I like Sadiq to finish this fight before the third round ends. I think he'll get a knockout. I just don't. It's a good fight though. I mean, it could go either way. This is another one that I wouldn't be real comfortable betting on because Benitez is very talented. All right, next. This isn't even the co-main event yet, and we're already at Yoel Romero versus Paulo Costa. And Yoel Romero is a guy who he just kind of like sits there, and he's real defensive, and his hands are up, and he's just kind of like moseying around the octagon, and then he explodes out of nowhere and knocks people dead. He's got an incredibly strong wrestling background. If you listen to the Joe Rogan podcast that he did, he came up in like Cuba, in the Cuba wrestling program, and they would like base how much you got to eat off of how you were ranked in the camp or whatever. It was fucking nuts. So you're talking about a guy who has been like working tirelessly his whole life, for the duration of his life, since he was a little kid. And he's a silver medalist. He won a silver medal in 2000 or 2004, one of those 2 years, at the Sydney Olympics in freestyle. Supremely talented, genetic freak, and he's fighting another genetic freak in Paulo Costa, who, when I look at this fight, I understand the hype behind Paulo Costa, but this is one of those things where I just think it's too much too soon for him. It might not be. I might be wrong. He might go out there and knock Yoel out, but Yoel stays super defensive. I think it's going to be hard for Paulo to land on him. I think that Yoel is extremely powerful as well. He's got an incredible wrestling background, like I said. I mean, I just think that this is a lot for Paulo Costa to overcome. I like Yoel Romero. I mean, you're talking about a guy his two losses in the UFC have been against Robert Whittaker, who's the current champion at 185 pounds. I mean, that's it. He's got one more loss on his record, but I think it was like a Strikeforce fight. But other than that, he's beaten Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold. Who else has he beaten? Derek Brunson, Brad Tavares, Tim Kennedy, Lyoto Machida. I mean, Jacare Souza. It's fucking his hit list is pretty impressive. And Paulo Costa's beat Johnny Hendricks and then he beat Uriah Hall. And it's like, okay, don't get me wrong. Those are like, you caught Johnny Hendricks on the downward part of his career though. And Uriah Hall is one of those guys who can be, especially early in fights, can be very hesitant to pull the trigger on things. And Paulo Costa he's got 12 wins. 11 of them have come by knockout, 1 by way of submission. It's not like he can't win this fight. I'm not denying that he could catch Yoel Romero and knock him out. I just think that the skill set that Romero possesses is just going to be too much for him to overcome. It's a lot, man. I mean, you're talking about a guy who is super explosive. I think Yoel's like 42 years old, and how old is Costa? 28. But this is one of those matchups I look at and I go, okay, it's of course it's tempting because if you look at Costa's career, I mean, yeah, he knocks everybody out, he finishes everybody, but I don't know, man. It would have made more sense to me to see him do it against like a more middle of the road guy first, like a David Branch or somebody, you know? I don't know. Someone who sits more in that like 7-8 spot at 185 pounds. This seems like a fucking handful. I think also part of the like marketing drive behind this fight is that they both look so good. Like they're both physically intimidating specimens, and I think that just if you look at the matchup when they're standing across from each other, you go, oh my God. But I really think that when the fight starts, you're going to see Yoel Romero's just entire skill set shine through. Moving on to the co-main event, and I can't fucking wait for this fight. This is probably the fight. I don't know, man, because DC and Stipe is going to be crazy. But Nate Diaz versus Anthony Pettis in the co-main event. is going to be a war. I feel like Pettis is one of the flashiest guys on the feet. Diaz is a great fucking boxer. They both have incredible jiu-jitsu, both off their back end. You know, especially Pettis has underrated jiu-jitsu. He gets so many guys off his back. Ben Henderson, Michael Chiesa, just to name two right off the top of my head. His jiu-jitsu is very underrated. He's very good there, but so is Diaz. So it's like everywhere that this fight goes, it's going to... And the thing about Diaz is Diaz likes to push a pace. So and in order for Pettis to not get beat up, he's going to have to return fire. Like, you can't just let Diaz sit there and hit you. I think just by the nature of Diaz's style, this is going to be an exciting fight. Here's my thing, though. Have you ever seen Nate Diaz get broken in a fight? Like, broken. Like, he doesn't want to fight anymore? Here's another thing that I want to ask you. And this is no disrespect to Anthony Pettis. Because Anthony Pettis has accomplished some amazing things. He was on the Wheaties box, you know? I mean, he's an incredible athlete, and he's a great fighter, and he's knocked out... I mean, some of his knockout of Wonder Boy, highlight reel. His knockout of Benson Henderson, highlight reel. He's incredible. But do you think that Nate Diaz would have quit in the Tony Ferguson fight? I don't think there's a cold chance in hell. I don't even think that thought would have crossed Nate Diaz's mind. Nate Diaz is as tough as they fucking come. I think that what you have to do, Pettis, you can break Pettis. I hate to say, like, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but like, I think you can break his will a little bit. You saw it against Poirier. You saw it against RDA. You saw it against Ferguson. It's like, if you got to drag him into deep water, and I just think that when it gets into deep water, and like if Diaz pushes a fast pace the entire fight, I think he'll break Pettis down. I think if I was placed, I'd be putting my money on Diaz based on toughness. I don't think Pettis is going to be able to get him out of there. If he does, it's going to be some by spectacular, like, highlight reel fashion hit. I don't think it'll be him putting the pressure on Diaz and landing, like, cumulative strikes that knock him out. I think it'll be vice versa. And I think you're going to see Nate Diaz get Anthony Pettis out of there in the third round or win a decision just by beating him up. That's what I honestly think. I just think that Diaz is going to just bring it, and Pettis might be able to hit him with some stuff, but Diaz isn't going to give a fuck. And like I said, good luck breaking one of the Diaz brothers' wills. It just doesn't happen. Like, you gotta kill them. I feel like if you were gonna fight Nate Diaz and, like, you know, he's never gonna quit, ever. I feel like you would literally have to kill him or knock him unconscious, choke him out. You got to do something. You got to take some. I feel like if he has even like the slightest, like, inkling of consciousness, he's gonna just keep pushing forward. He's a fucking nut, dude, and I think that you're going to see that in this fight. I think that's really going to shine through, the toughness of Diaz. And, yeah, I've got Diaz in this matchup. All right, now we're on to the main event between Daniel Cormier and Stipe. And there's so many questions going into this fight about what's going to happen because, all right, you got Stipe, and on paper he's way bigger than DC in terms of height, in terms of his length, right? He's got a wrestling background. But DC moves up to heavyweight, and in their first fight, knocks him out, gets in close, and hits him with that big right hand, drops him. Boom. And it makes you wonder, like, how much power does DC have at heavyweight, right? Like, a lot, obviously. He knocked out Steve. It's more than it was at 205. You didn't really see that one-punch knockout power from him at 205, right? So now you have an added element added to Daniel Cormier's game that Stipe is aware of, as is Cormier. He's like, okay, I have some fucking power up here. Like, I'm knocking guys out cold with one shot. One shot, right? So you definitely have to keep that in mind. And it's in the back, not in the back of Stipe's head. It's probably in the forefront of his mind that this guy's knocked me out before. Getting in close and boxing with him, he's going to have to stay at range. Stipe Miocic, before losing to Daniel Cormier, I think had one of the arguments for the greatest heavyweights of all time. And if you look at what DC accomplished in the heavyweight division before this, if DC goes out and beats him dominantly again, you might have to have an argument for Daniel Cormier thrown in there. I mean, DC is an animal. This fight is so tough to pick because I don't know what's going to happen. If Stipe Miocic is able to mix things up consistently and go to the legs and teeps to the body, right? Keeping that jab out there, that long jab, he has got to keep the pressure off of him. And Daniel Cormier knows how to pressure box. That's why this fight is so great. That's why the first matchup was so great. And it's just going to be like, it's going to be a matter of who's going to adjust, who's going to make the adjustments. You know, is DC going to be able to get through that? Is he going to be able to continue to box if Stipe's keeping him at range? Like, how's he going to deal with that problem? Is he going to start shooting takedowns? Is Stipe going to be controlling the range and it'll cause DC to shoot poor takedowns? I don't know. This fight to me is a coin flip fight. When you're dealing with anyone in the heavyweight division, I always think that. But these guys are both so supremely talented. I mean, there's a good chance that tomorrow night you're going to be tuning in to watch the two best heavyweights that have ever fought. Ever. And they're going to be fighting each other. It's going to be pretty incredible. I know that it's hard to give. DC is one of the greatest of all time, no doubt about it. He beats everybody. His only loss has been against John Jones. He got knocked out by John, but it got officially overturned to a no contest. Say what you want about the steroid thing. Fuck, man, DC is... It's also just the way that, like, DC applies pressure. Like, he just does everything right. He is so technically sound. And I think it's going to be a fast-paced fight. I think this fight's over within 3 rounds. I think this fight will end within like 3 or 4. I don't think this fight's going to go the whole way. I just think the pace of the fight is going to be too fast. And like the pace that Daniel Cormier sets, at some point, something significant is going to happen in the fight that'll end it. Yeah, I think so. I just don't know who it's going to fucking be. If I had to pick somebody, I would pick Daniel Cormier. Just because his wrestling is so elite, his boxing is so good. He has so many ways that he can threaten you. But like I said, Stipe's a big boy, and he has a strong wrestling background. You saw him grind it out for 5 rounds against Francis Ngannou. I mean, this is a coin flip. I'm going Daniel Cormier. I think it'll be like maybe a 3rd, 4th round submission. Maybe 3rd, 4th round knockout, ground and pound. If Stipe wins, I think that the way it'll likely come on the feet. He'll probably have maintained distance and started battering DC up with some big shots. You know, DC has that weird tendency. For all DC's good at, he has a tendency to lean to his right. And Stipe's got a strong left hand. Throw that left head kick up there, man. You've seen it be detrimental to DC before. So there are a lot of things. Stipe's got to focus on his footwork. DC's going to be applying pressure. Like I said, you got to keep the kicks coming. You got to keep things in DC's face constantly in this fight if you're going to have a chance. If not, he's just going to dictate the pace and he's going to dictate where it goes. But I'm going with DC. 3rd or 4th round stoppage. I think probably submission or ground and pound. I think if this fight ends on the feet, it'll probably be Stipe this time. I think he's going to do a good enough job at like not getting into that dirty kind of boxing range that they were in before. But fuck, I think DC is going to have, and then that'll cause DC to start pushing things up against the fence and take him down. It's going to be a great fight though. I can't wait. This is a great fucking fight card. Fight of the night prediction, probably Pettis and Diaz, but the co-main, the main, and Yoel Romero versus Paulo Costa, in my opinion, all have a ton of potential to be fight of the night. I think they all of those fights could play out a bunch of different ways, right? And I think that just by the nature of the people that are fighting, it makes for exciting fights. I don't think Costa and Romero will get it, just because I think that when Romero's fighting, he's going to remain super defensive because Costa's so dangerous. And I think that fight will probably be like a knockout of the night type of thing. Pettis versus Diaz, I think, has potential to go all 3 rounds and to be a war the entire time. And Stipe and DC has potential to be a back and forth fight. You know, that could end up being the best fight of the night. I don't know. It could go a lot of different ways, man. That's what makes this. And there's a lot of big names on it. This card is much needed in light of some of the ones that have been put on lately. I don't have a problem. Like, I enjoyed just sitting down and watching some of them. There just haven't been any huge ones lately. So it's nice to get amped up for something like this, right? Like, I still appreciate the small cards and just sitting down and kind of like casually watching them. Like, I still enjoy them. I still appreciate it. I still respect what the fighters have done to get ready for all that and stuff. But, man, there's just something about having the heavyweight title on the line, and it's DC and Stipe. And then under that, you got Pettis, Diaz, Romero, Costa to get you warmed up. And then 2 great fights leading up to those. Hard card to beat, man. I'm excited for it. And let's go back and just recap the picks real quick. I'm taking Brunson over Ian Heinisch. I think Brunson's just going to be able to land a shot at some point. But this fight, especially these first two, I really think these could go either way. It's really going to depend. But I'm taking Brunson, Sadiq Youssef, Yoel Romero, Nate Diaz, and Daniel Cormier. Whew. I'm fucking pumped. But I'll rule one of these out on Sunday. We'll do an aftermath show. We'll talk about the results of the fight and stuff, obviously. Any other news? I think there's a break, and then Andrade's fighting for... She's defending her title against Weili Zhang, and then there's a couple fights after that. But we'll get breakdowns rolled out for all those, talk about some other stuff. As I got to start making these more consistently at some point, right? So I know this one was a little bit choppy, a little bit rough. Thank you for sticking it through with me. And, follow us on Instagram, MMA.analysis. We're on subscribe to the channel. Throw us a like, comment, suggestions, questions, anything like that. Leave in the comments. And, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Bye-bye.